It's a stupid day in the neighborhood, a stupid day to be religious. So could you be smart? Would you be smart? Or would you be Greg Koukl? You know, the more I look at apologetic channels like STR, the more I realize that we should really pity these people. There is something really seriously wrong with them upstairs. They're brainwashed by their faith, and nothing short of a mental enema is going to get it out. This time, Greg Koukl craps on the memory of Mr. Rogers so he can make a point by telling us what Mr. Rogers really meant and what really should have happened. I guess that means that Greg is a mind reader now. No, that's not true. He's just a dishonest shyster. So, let's go look.
Confidence for every Christian. Clear thinking for every challenge. And courage and grace for every encounter.
I want to talk for just a moment, offer you a reflection about something I heard about a very good man. His name is Mr. Rogers. You might have grown up with him on TV. He died about 15 years ago now.
And now you're going to crap on his corpse. Now, granted, I was never really a big Mr. Rogers person growing up. It was just getting started when I was that age, and while I'm sure I must have seen some of it at some point in time, it just doesn't resonate with me the way that it does a lot of other people, and I really have no nostalgic feelings about it. I didn't really grow up in an era where you just dropped kids in front of a TV and ignored them. That said, though, I do have a lot of respect for some of the things that Mr. Rogers tried to do, and I have nothing bad to say about him in general. Now, I bet Greg can't say the same thing.
But I watched a documentary on his life, and there were so many remarkable things that I learned about Mr. Rogers that I was very impressed with him as an individual. Now, he was an ordained Presbyterian minister, and I don't know a lot about his deep theological convictions. Very little came up regarding that in the documentary. However, it was pretty clear that his theology was dictating a lot of his behaviors towards other human beings. That is, helping people feel accepted and loved and cared for in ways that he actually hadn't felt loved and accepted and cared for as a kid.
Not in the same way yours does, because Fred Rogers wasn't a douchebag. He might have been religious, but he still hired openly gay people to act on his show. Race and gender were widely accepted on Mr. Rogers. In fact, there was a scene during the show where Fred Rogers shared a footbath with black actor Francois Clemens, who later came out as gay. It was a landmark moment in race relations during the turbulent 1960s. While Rogers insisted that Clemens did nothing to reveal his sexual orientation on the show, I mean, this is made for preschoolers after all, and absolutely nobody's sexual orientation ought to be talked about, he didn't have a problem with having a gay black man on his show for 25 years. And I bet you can't say that about Greg and his band of idiots.
And he was magnificent in that regard.
Yes, he was. So why is it that all of these religious wingnuts can't just do the same thing? Fred Rogers never opened his mouth and condemned gay people or black people or any of the traditional targets that the religious apologists do every single day. Fred Rogers, even if I don't have any kind of nostalgic connection to him, he was a far better person than you are, Greg.
So I have no qualms about that. But I was troubled that at the end of his life, he had a conversation with his wife, and he had just been reading Matthew 25, the separation of the sheep from the goats, and he said to his wife, "Do you think that I'm one of the sheep?" And his wife said to him, Honey, if anyone was a sheep, you are.
Sorry, but I'd consider that to be a terrible insult because being a sheep isn't anything to be proud of. It means being a blind follower of an ideology for no good, rational reason. Yet Christians seem to be honored by the idea of being stupid for some unknown reason.
Now I want you to think about that for a moment. From the perspective of the grace of God in Christian theology.
Screw Christian theology. And you're going to see why I say that in a moment, but honestly, that's the case. This is just another example of a Christian apologist only talking to other sheep because they don't ask too many questions and they certainly can't think intelligently about their beliefs. It's really not that hard to see why all of this fails so utterly miserably. But hey, let's let Greg dig his own grave.
At the end of my life, I am not going to look back on my life and recount all of the good things that I have done in order to make myself feel comfortable as I face death that I have done enough good things to qualify for the kingdom of God.
Can we speak any slower, Greg? Jeez, come on. But anyhow, here he's assuming that Mr. Rogers was doing that without having any idea what was going through his head. Now that's very common. Theists seem to think that they know it all. It's why they spend so much time telling other theists what atheists really think and what we really want. They don't ask us. They just make it up in their heads, and then they tell others just how right they are. It's what happens when arrogance and irrationality intersect. But when Greg has an agenda, truth never gets in the way, does it?
I know that I haven't.
You don't actually know a thing, Greg. You believe that you haven't. Just like you believe in this absurd magical sky daddy and this ridiculously unproven place called heaven, and you don't know any of that. This is where people like Greg entirely leave the rational reservation. They can't differentiate between their blind faith and ridiculous beliefs and knowledge. Like it or not, Greg, they're not the same thing. Rent a clue.
Think about it for a moment. The two greatest commandments that Jesus gave, the summary of the whole law: love your Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
And which one of those do you follow, Greg? Because Baptists like yourself are really outspoken against gay people. The Southern Baptists' official position on homosexuality is, quote, even a desire to engage in a homosexual relationship is always sinful, impure, degrading, shameful, unnatural, indecent, and perverted. The 2000 Baptist Faith and Message Statement says that homosexuality is the same as adultery and pornography, saying, in the spirit of Christ, Christians should oppose all forms of sexual immorality, including adultery, homosexuality, and pornography. I'm not quite seeing where you love your neighbor as yourself, Greg.
You know, if that's the summary of the law, there is hardly a moment in my entire life when I have ever fulfilled either of those. If that's the way I am to be judged, then I'm a goner.
We wish. Maybe you'd shut up and stop making a fool of yourself. But I guess that's just not going to happen, is it? Because Greg is a hypocrite. All of them are. They play holier than thou, and when it's pointed out that they're not holy, they'll go back and play the "we're all sinners" card, and then keep telling you what you ought to do, while not doing it themselves. I'm not sure why anyone falls for this.
And so is everyone else. Our good deeds are like filthy rags. It's our iniquities that get us. And on my tombstone, I want what it says in Psalm 130, I think, verse 3 and 4. If you, Lord, should mark iniquity, O Lord, who could stand?
That was honestly one of the most awkward and badly done transitions that I've seen lately. But anyway, all of this relies on the belief, the entirely unsupported belief in a book of ancient mythology, that any of this is true at all. Prove it, Greg. Back it up. And this is where things are going to go off the rails, so hold on to your hats.
Not me. Not Mr. Rogers. As good as he was, as noble as he was, probably a much better human being than I'll ever be. I fully acknowledge that.
Yeah, he was. You, on the other hand, you're crap, Greg.
But if God were to mark our iniquities, no one would stand. The psalmist goes on to say, but with you there is forgiveness, that you may be praised. With you there is forgiveness. You see, that's the hope.
And this is exactly why you never rely on faith, because it gets in the way of rational thought. So let's compare God to, say Hitler. It's a pretty apt comparison considering how God behaved in the Old Testament. Actually, when you think about it, Hitler was a far better person than God could ever be. But if you look at the passage that he's reading, that God will forgive you because the whole purpose of your existence is to kiss his ass, well, God gets off on your worship, so he's really willing to overlook anything that you do, other than rejecting his big fat ass to smooch. Because, hey, he gets something out of it. Supposedly, anyhow. So, what if we substituted Hitler for God? Hitler will let you do anything, so long as you kiss his ass. He will forgive any transgression except rejecting him. So, you can get away with anything because, hey, you're just following orders. You are responsible not for following the rules of man, but for following the orders of a madman. How'd that work out for the Nazis at Nuremberg? Not very well.
The hope isn't whether I have done enough good things in my life, because I haven't. I know that. You know that. Mr. Rogers knew that. That's why he asked the question.
How do you know that? Were you there? Do you have amazing mind-reading powers? Or are you just making it up because you've got an agenda, Greg? You figure you get to speak for anyone else, especially for people who can't speak for themselves, because it gets you where you want to go. Not only is that dishonest, which I guess is hardly a surprise, but it's really kind of a scummy thing to do.
The only hope is in the grace of God. And I wish his wife had told him at that point, Fred, you have been rescued from the domain of darkness and transferred into the kingdom of God's beloved Son, in whom you have redemption.
Which is a dumb thing to say. But now you want to stuff words into the mouth of his wife. You have an agenda, Greg. You're using that conversation for your own nefarious purposes. Because, Greg, you're a dick. Your wishes and dreams don't mean a thing. Try reality sometime.
Forgiveness of sins. That's what I'm banking on in my last day.
Then you're an idiot. But I guess we already knew that. It doesn't matter what you're banking on. It matters what is actually true. You can count on Hitler's forgiveness, but that doesn't stop you from getting carted off for crimes against humanity. Because ultimately, that's where all of this goes. You hold beliefs that are not defensible, but you're mentally incapable of intellectually evaluating your emotionally held beliefs. So, I guess it's no wonder that you just keep making a fool of yourself. It's what all of these STR videos do, after all. They demonstrate the depths to which the human mind can plummet when they can't be bothered to actually think. There's nothing at all going on up in his head. It's just blind faith and absurd indoctrination speaking. He lacks the ability to step back and look at the things that are coming out of his mouth with anything remotely resembling intelligent thought. He can't because if he could, no rational person would continue to hold those beliefs. But Greg is not a rational person. Greg is a joke. It's why we continue to point and laugh. He and his ilk are the best examples of the failures of Christianity. The fact that he believes any of this shows just how sad and pathetic they are. Kind of makes you think, huh? Too bad it doesn't make him do so.
Bum